everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Partnerships for Power, the first wave of interconnected minigrid projects in Nigeria, hosted by RMI and GIAP. We are very pleased to have you join us today, and we appreciate your interest in this exciting and rapidly evolving space, interconnected minigrids, in the context of sub-Saharan African power sector challenges and opportunities. My name is Alberto Rodriguez, and I will be your host today. I work with RMI at the Africa Energy Program. Over the past few years, we have been working closely with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, GIAP, across Nigeria to support the rollout of interconnected minigrids, or IMGs, as I will be referring to them. Today's session is about sharing real-world insights and lessons learned from Nigeria's first 4 operational interconnected minigrid projects. Our goal today is to shine a line on, number 1, what worked well during this learning phase of interconnected minigrids and what didn't. Number 2, what it takes to get an interconnected minigrid off the ground and some key recommendations for a faster, better, and cheaper future deployment of these solutions. And number 3, how can we scale this model across Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa? All of this information and much more can be accessed through a public report that GIAP and RMI have recently released. You can access the report by clicking on the link provided in the chat box. A brief description about RMI and GIAP before we get started. RMI is an independent, non-profit organization founded in 1982 that is transforming global energy use and systems to create a clean, prosperous, and secure low-carbon future for all. GIAP is an alliance of sector partners working together to support developing countries to shift to a clean energy model that ensures universal energy access while enabling the global community to meet critical climate goals during the next decade. Africa Energy Program RMI works with local partners to ensure renewable electricity access for sustainable development and a low-cost, low-carbon, climate-resilient future around 3 pillars. Our first pillar is scaling distributed energy resources and clean energy portfolios. So that is solutions such as interconnected minigrids that we are presenting today or embedded generation. Number 2, growing green economies. And number 3, catalyzing progress through catalytic investments and workforce development. Our core geography is Nigeria, where we have a full team on the ground. We are seeking expansion in at least 4 additional countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have presence through regional engagements in an additional 21 countries. This slide summarizes the reasons why we are here today. African nations continue to struggle for reliable and abundant power. In addition to the 600 million people that are unelectrified in sub-Saharan Africa, an equally significant number remain highly underserved by weak or unreliable grids, forcing them to rely on expensive, highly polluting fossil fuel generators. At RMI and GIAP, we are convinced that there is a better way, but utilities are the gatekeepers of these customers and need support as well as partnerships with private sector players. The questions we have asked ourselves over the past few years is, what is the shortest, most effective road to increase access to clean, reliable, and affordable power? And how do we get there? This is where interconnected minigrids can play a strong complementary role to existing solutions to achieve some of the sustainability goals. To resolve those questions, GIAP and RMI designed and implemented a 3-year program with the intention of demonstrating interconnected minigrid proof points through 4 major work streams. Number 1, direct support to the IMG pilot project developers that you will be learning about later today. Number 2, enhancing the capacity at the utilities or discos around these solutions by creating DER departments and embedding DER officers. Number 3 is about data collection and M&E plan so that we can derive insights and data analytics for the sector. And number 4, provide broader project pipeline development support to the sector. About today's organizers and speakers, very briefly, today you will hear from developers, from utilities or discos, regulators, and the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria, and our team, all of whom have been deeply involved in making IMG solutions work in Nigeria. So the agenda for today, here is what to expect over the next 90 minutes or so. A webinar introduction and welcome remarks by GIAP and RMI, followed by a main presentation session in which we will explain and provide an overview on how the interconnected minigrid model works. We will highlight successes and learnings from what we call the first wave of projects. We will transition into a panel discussion with voices from NERC, DISCOs, and private sector developers. And finally, we will open the floor for your questions and reflections. So please use the Q&A box throughout the session. We will not be taking live questions. Finally, our RMI Nigeria Country Director, Suleiman Babamanu, will be providing closing remarks. All this work would have not been possible without the generous partnership with GIAP. And this leads me to introduce our first speaker, Fausia Okediji. Fausia is a manager at GIAP, where she has led the efforts to integrate distributed renewable energy with national grids. She oversees GIAP's interconnected minigrid work, which supported the successful deployment of Nigeria's first operational IMG pilot projects. Prior to that, she led the Interconnected Minigrid Acceleration Scheme at GIZ, which was Nigeria's first structured public-private platform, championed as well by REA. Welcome, Fausia.
Thank you, Alberto. Thanks a lot for that introduction. So hello, everyone, and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's truly a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, GIAP, as we explore the insights, lessons, and opportunities emerging from the pioneering interconnected mini-grids in Nigeria. Just to mention again that I'm Fausia, and I've had the joy and occasional stress-induced acne of leading this program for the past 3 years. It's been a journey, powered by collaboration with our incredible partners, RMI, the government, and importantly, the main actors, the utilities, Ikeja Electric, KEDCO, and Abuja Disco, and the developers, GVE, Darwe Coast, Bagaja, Renewables, and PowerGen, and importantly, the communities who drive this work and without whom we wouldn't have anything to discuss today. So at GIAP, we don't just see energy access as about turning on light bulbs. It's about turning on opportunities, jobs, businesses, healthcare, education, everything that makes a community thrive. And we believe with today's technology, there's no reason any community should be left in the dark. So the IMG pilots is a bold example of what's possible when DREs integrate with utility infrastructure. Yes, these pilots have delivered 3 megawatts of solar, PV, and strengthened distribution grids. But the IMG conversation isn't just about hardware. It's about rethinking systems, showing how utilities and decentralized energy mini-grid developers can work together, not in parallel universes, to deliver strong reliability, resilience, and a viable, scalable pathway to closing the electricity gap. So the results that we're discussing today were only made possible through deep partnerships with utilities that were willing to innovate, developers who rolled up their sleeves, and communities who shaped the approach on the ground. And of course, our government stakeholders who supported us all along the way. And like with any pioneering work, it hasn't been without challenges. We've learned a whole lot, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. In fact, if mistakes were megawatts, we'd probably be discussing 30 megawatts by now. But every lesson has made us sharper. We've become more adaptive and even more committed to getting this right, not once, but again and again and again, and across the country and beyond. And I would like to add that this work also aligns with the Mission 300 effort by the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and partners across the continent to connect 300 million people in Africa to electricity by 2030. So the IMG model that we're discussing today is one of the building blocks towards that goal. So that's why today isn't just about looking back. It's also about sharing what we've learned with all of you so that together we can accelerate what's next. So we've got an exciting lineup of speakers and data-driven insights that the RMI team would be diving into in a short while. So thank you once again for being here, whether you're a policymaker, a developer, utility, an investor, an advocate, or you just clicked on the Zoom link and decided to stick around. We're glad you're here, and yeah, let's dive in. So thank you very much. Over to you, Alberto.
Thank you, Fausia, for those welcome remarks. I would like to welcome now REA. Unfortunately, Abba Aliyu, the MD, couldn't make it for a last-minute decision. Instead, we have Abba Hayatuddin. He's a senior advisor to the MD of REA. Welcome, Abba.
Thank you, Alberto. Indeed, the MD could not make it due to a last-minute call, regrettably. But I will do my possible best to ensure that his thoughts are provided to all the participants in a way that ensures that the message is delivered on this very critical topic to the REA. I guess, first of all, what I would like to say is that the title of this webinar is aptly named, right? Partnerships. Indeed, the conversation around energy access is one that is relying on a set of robust partnerships across all the actors within the energy access space, from the communities, the last mile communities to be connected, the policymakers, developers, and all those entities that have particularly stated that energy access, renewable energy, clean energy technologies is something that forms part of their mission. With that being said, integrated, or I should say interconnected mini-grids forms part of our sustainable energy access strategy. This is because if you were to look at the headline figures, anywhere between 89 to 90 million Nigerians lack access to electricity. Perhaps even more are served by the grid, but are not done so in a manner that satisfied that need. So in our view, in the REA, if you were to draw a Venn diagram of those two sets, you would find that the intersection point is interconnected mini-grids. This is because what we've seen from our efforts to connect the last mile is that the cheapest, most resilient, and more sustainable technology to connect the last mile is indeed these distributed energy resources in the form of isolated mini-grids that are, in most cases, solar powered. We've seen that in the Nigeria electrification project that was sponsored or supported by the World Bank, wherein we saw the crystallization of new business models that took a surgical approach to extending these technologies to the last mile to provide electricity access, as opposed to what the REA has been doing prior to that time, which is along the lines of traditional grid extension. This conferred a number of advantages in our opinion, and what we've seen from the data. We've seen that the lead times in those projects were shorter, it was cheaper, and it was more inclusive, as it required the private sector developers to go and interact quite deeply with these communities and actually agree on modalities for them to be connected. Now we've seen a lot of success with the Nigeria electrification project. As we ramp up to a scale-up phase, as we race towards the universal access by 2030, mindful of the fact of the compact that the Nigerian government signed onto Mission 300 in Dar es Salaam, as Fausia has so eloquently stated earlier. We've seen that it's not just a race to universal access, it's also the recognition that we must do so in a manner that is sustainable, which is why I referenced the sustainable energy access earlier. So we're seeing that for us to increasingly tick that sustainability box, we have to retool our entire approach towards energy access. Perhaps retool is the wrong word here, because we're also building on iteratively. We're seeing improvements, and we're seeing that even the private sector rescues that we're able to build the capacity on the back of the NEP are also responding to this ambition in a way that speaks to the partnership that the IRA seeks in order to achieve this massive ambition. But of course, the other element to that is to leverage the gatekeepers to the universal access, which Alberto referenced. These are our existing utilities. Where I'm also mindful of the fact that the Nigeria electricity supply industry is witnessing a market reform agenda that is an entire retooling, now I can use the word retooling, of the entire ecosystem, the entire sector itself, from vertically integrated utility to now one that is horizontally unbundled to bring in the private sector. Because of the overarching reform agenda, as well as the participation of the private sector and the speed with which the off-grid space has developed, it has been quite challenging to do so in a manner that is coordinated. And this is where I feel interconnected mini-grids really has a key role to play, because enabling, or rather relying on the grid interaction that the DRE has the potential to leverage, you can see how quite easily you can further reduce the cost of extending electricity access and also providing the utilities different pathways to providing service to their already existing customers, improving reliability, providing them an off-balance sheet approach to actually extend their service. We've seen, again, the response from the regulators in terms of mandating a minimum portfolio standard of utilities to procure additional capacity, distributed renewable energy, right? So all of these policies, all of these efforts, the initiatives that the REA, along with the RMIs, the GAPs, and all these participants in the space has really been positive, and it has brought us to this inflection point where I think really if we're to move the needle in a manner that is sustainable, we must leverage these existing platforms of utilities and distributed energy resources. As I said, that intersection point is the interconnected mini-grids, right? Now, the work we've been doing with the RMI, the technical team, is to demonstrate the first 40 sites out of the 600 sites that we've received from the DISCOs. So this is another commitment from the utilities to say that they are open for this partnership, right? RMI has provided tremendous support in deep studies in actually de-risking that entire project in a manner that supports this 40 sites. We've done the RSD. We've been happy with the response from the rescues. We're about to do an RFP. We're about to complete that RFP stage so that we can quickly begin implementation, which I believe will inform a lot of learnings going forward, and as we build that pipeline to support the interconnected mini-grids. If I would say that one key message I would say for all the participants to really be aware of is this partnership and inclusion. If we are to succeed in what we are doing in the race towards universal access, if we're to build a modern energy system that is indeed resilient, that is indeed safe, affordable, then we must do so in a manner that is inclusive, not just utilities of these communities, but also of the government and increasingly the subnational governments. We're also aware that the new Electricity Act provides the legislative latitude for the subnationals to participate in this space. This has actually caused the RA to look at things a bit differently, to also begin to drive that facilitation role and bring all these actors together so that they can be positive change agents as we approach universal access, right? This is why we
Sorry to interrupt. but I need to keep us moving. If you don't mind wrapping up in 15 seconds, we would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up in a bit less, right? So all this is to say that there's a national electrification strategy and implementation plan that REA is anchoring alongside the subnationals to ensure that their participation in the space is one that ends up being a positive influence on our journey to universal access. So I'll stop here. There's a lot to talk about. A lot of participants will ask questions later on during the session. Thank you very much, RMI. Thank you very much, Gia, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ava, for those initial remarks and insights into how do we scale the market and REA's role. Just before transitioning into the main presentation, we would like to know which stakeholder you represent. Throughout today's webinar, we are going to be using Zoom's poll features to make sure we engage directly with you. Small window should have popped up on your screen by now with the following question: what stakeholder group do you represent? So please go ahead and fill out your answer. We sincerely hope that today's conversation will spark new ideas and opportunities to collaborate. Let's dive right in and see the results and analysis of our work. I would like to introduce you to Fola Aminu, Senior Associate at RMI, who is going to walk us through the IMG overview and some of the analysis captured in our IMG report.
Thanks, Alberto, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fola Aminu, and for the next 20 minutes, we will be sharing some key learnings and insights from supporting the first wave of interconnected mini-grid projects in Nigeria. But first of all, what's an interconnected mini-grid? In many urban and peri-urban areas in Nigeria and across Africa, the grid exists, but it's unreliable and weak and unable to provide enough power to meet customer needs. The interconnected mini-grid model is designed to address this challenge. With the interconnected mini-grid, the developer builds a solar and battery system, a local solar and battery system, supplying a ring-fenced area. The developer funds and implements upgrades to the distribution network in the area, including providing meters to all customers. In terms of supply, power supply comes primarily from the solar and battery solution. The power is wheeled via the existing and newly improved distribution network in the area. And then the main grid supplements the supply from the local generation assets to minimize the usage of gensets and batteries in the IMG. In terms of payments, the typical interconnected mini-grid model, the customers will pay a blended tariff for all energy from the grid and local mini-grid assets. The mini-grid will act as a single customer to the DISCO, and the developer pays the DISCO for the energy consumed from the main grid. The IMG developer or operator would also pay a network fee to the DISCO for all energy that's wheeled in the interconnected mini-grid. In summary, the key difference between an interconnected mini-grid and an isolated mini-grid is that the interconnected mini-grid leverages the existing distribution network for power and blends in low-cost power from the main grid. This is a visual representation of a simple interconnected mini-grid architecture. So the IMG in this example is receiving power through a 33 kV feeder from the grid. That 33 kV power is stepped down to 415 volts and blended with the power coming from the interconnected mini-grid generation plant. So the solar PV, the battery system, the diesel genset, and the grid all feed into a distribution panel with protection equipment before being stepped up and fed back into the community. You can also see that there's a bulk energy meter at the point of interconnection between the grid and the IMG. Now, why do IMGs provide this win-win-win opportunity? With IMGs, as Alberto, Fauzia, and Abba mentioned, the discos are able to leverage private sector capital to improve their networks and increase supply on the grid. Developers can also leverage the existing infrastructure and serve the utilities customers that allows them to deploy at scale while achieving lower costs and higher revenues than greenfield isolated minigrid projects. And finally, the customers also win with cheaper, more reliable, and an all-round better energy experience. This is the win-win-win opportunity that interconnected minigrids present. Now, a large part of why we're here today is to celebrate the progress that has been made with this first wave of projects. The Total IMG, which is Nigeria's first interconnected minigrid, developed by PowerGen and Abuja Disco, has demonstrated this win-win-win opportunity I've described and has shown promise in transforming the economics of typical minigrid systems for minigrid developers. This project, with 4 times the consumption per user of a typical isolated minigrid, shows that promise of significantly improving the economics. This is a 352 kilowatt project that is serving over 1,700 connections. With the Zawachiki IMG in the north, the largest interconnected minigrid in the country and the first in the core north, it capitalizes on the abundant sunshine in the north. This project is located in Kano, so it's far away from most grid-connected generation plants, and it faces severe limitations from the transmission grid or TCN's grid to serve that area. This project shows how IMGs can address those challenges stemming from this issue. This 1 megawatt project developed by Bagaja Renewables and KEDCO is serving over 1,000 connections. The Robinho IMG developed by Dawe Coast and Ikeja Electric shows how IMGs can address the energy needs of communities with inadequate distribution grid infrastructure. In Robinho, this community has in the past had to self-fund their own grid extension projects and distribution network projects. But now, over 1,400 customers are being served by this 500 kilowatt IMG. Finally, the Wusi IMG, developed by GVE and Abuja Disco, is a 1 megawatt IMG serving the large Wusi market and displacing over 2,000 noisy petrol generators. Now, before I go into the key learnings that we have gleaned from the operations of these mini-grids, we have our second Zoom poll that should pop up about now. So these IMG communities, before, they had an average of less than 3 hours of daily supply before the IMGs became operational. How many hours of daily supply do you think these IMG communities averaged in the last quarter of 2024? So from 3 hours to how many hours? Please share your response via the Zoom polls. Next slide, please. So these IMG communities received over 18 hours of daily supply in the last quarter of 2024, from 3 hours, as I mentioned, before the IMGs. That is a 7x increase. The grid supply in these communities have also significantly improved since before the IMGs and even the early days of IMG operation, showing that these IMGs are really solving the challenge that these communities faced. Both the Toto and Zawachiki IMGs have generated data and been operational for over 1.5 years. And on this slide, you can see a snippet of operational data from both sites. These IMGs have also led to a 62% increase in connections in these communities. On top of that, in these IMG areas, the consumption is up to 15 times the consumption per user of typical isolated mini-grids. As part of the IMG development, as I mentioned earlier, the developer would meter all the customers in the area, which helps improve payment habits and assures both the developer and DISCOs of their revenues. It's interesting to note that the DISCO would also inherit all of this improved operational infrastructure after the IMG term elapses. On the consumption side, because these projects are built in more urban and peri-urban areas with more commercial customers and higher income residential customers, the IMG consumption per user and revenues are significantly higher than those from isolated mini-grid customers. These IMGs have led to improved and expanded energy access. The DISCOs themselves have also seen a significant increase in revenues and reduction in losses in these operational IMGs. Before the IMGs, the DISCOs were facing close to 60% in ATC and C losses in these areas. But now, with the developer responsible for billing and collection, the DISCOs collect 100% from these communities, and the developers have been able to drive down a lot of those additional losses, a lot of those additional commercial collection and technical losses. Obviously, this means that then the DISCOs are then able to reallocate resources to other areas, ensuring that they can serve their other customers with resources that was being used to serve these IMG communities in the past. Now, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Ridwan Zubair, to share some of our key learnings on project timelines, grid interconnection, and project costs. If you have any questions, feel free to share them using the Q&A feature. And I'll pass it on to you now, Ridwan.
Thanks, Fola. Nice to be here again. Good afternoon, everyone. My colleague Fola Aminu has shared some of the results, early results, and analysis that we have done over the past 2.5 years, 3 years. I will delve further into some of the lessons we have learned over the course of the project implementation. Next slide, please. I think the first lesson learned I would like to highlight is the project timeline. We have seen some of the projects experiencing significant delays. Some of those delays, result from prolonged project negotiations. Now, project of this nature, because of their tripartite nature, it requires 3 parties agreeing on some of the key terms of the project. We have the developer, we have the DISCO, and the communities. Often at times, getting each of these 3 parties to agree on some of these terms could be a little challenging. Some of the challenges also emanate from changes in DISCO leadership, regulatory landscape changes, changes around cost reflective tariff, state electricity regulatory commission, and a host of other input that affect project negotiations. Also, procurement was something that most of the developers or most of the project experienced challenges. I'm sure you are well aware that most of the key equipment for this type of project are usually imported from outside the country, and because of that, importation logistics, especially delays at the port and also with sourcing FX, was a major challenge for most of the project, which delayed the project. As you can see on the chart, during the construction, most of the projects experienced significant delays. Another aspect that led to some of these project delays was on commissioning and certification. Typically, for projects like this in Nigeria, you need to get the sign-off from the authorization agency, which is NEMSA. NEMSA will typically approve and pass your project safe for commercial operations. So often at times, because of misunderstanding between what the expectation from NEMSA is and from what the developer thought the expectation is, we often get to a situation where NEMSA flag your project for a snags, and you have to go back to rectify some of those snags. We've seen cases where this back and forth could lead to about 6 months or even 9 months of project delays. Finally, we have seen also that interconnection. So interconnection is a major part which differentiate this type of project from your typical isolated IMG. So once you're done with constructing the distribution network, the generation asset, you need to interconnect with the grid. I'll shed more light on some of the challenges with interconnection on the next slide. So for interconnection, we've seen that at the moment, because this project are first of its kind, we didn't see that standardization across discos and across projects. So there's that lack of standardization. Also, alignment on rules and responsibility was something most of our partners find very challenging, because these are mostly the first project of this kind that they are doing. We know for sure that there is room for standardization, but I can quickly run you through some of the summaries of how rules and responsibility were shared on the pilot project. So I'll start with Toto. You can see for the bulk meter procurement developer, you can see the disco is being represented with the pylon symbol, while the developer is the engineer there. And in cases where both the developer and the disco shares responsibility, we have combined both icons together. So in total, you can see that the disco took care of the bulk electricity bill, meter rather, and then developer took care of every other aspect of interconnection. In some cases, we've seen a balanced share of responsibility between the developer and disco. In some cases, we saw the developer taking the lead in most of all these cases. The bottom line, the key lessons we have learned here is that standardization has to happen for discos who are expecting more IMGs to come up in their franchise area. You need to define these rules very clearly. We also, observe that the interconnection rules and responsibility are nowhere clearly spelled out. So you see a situation where the developer and the disco, delay the conversation on interconnection until the very end, and the question now arises: who is supposed to buy meter? Who is supposed to, do the MV network rehabilitation? And some of these questions, you have to now start solving them as they occur. Next slide, please. I would like to get your input using this next quiz. What according to your educated guest would be the percentage of the total project cost that went into distribution and interconnection? Thank you for your guesses. Majority of respondents, believe it should be about 44%. But then, as you've seen on the charts on my left, for most of the project, distribution and interconnection took a large chunk of the project budget. And why is that? You ask yourself. This is, mostly due to the aging infrastructure across the country. This is not peculiar to IMG locations alone. If you look around you, you see that some of the grid infrastructure are due for a change, and the needed investment is usually not there. So IMGs are a way for distribution network to get upgraded and rehabilitated. We also another thing that pushed up the budget for distribution was the need to add an extra layer of power conditioning. Sometimes the power quality coming from the bulk grid is poor, so you sometimes have to do voltage regulation, filtering and cleaning of the energy before it becomes useful for your generation assets, for you to blend with the rest of the generation equipment. On my left, you have total with about 45% of all project cost going to the distribution and interconnection. For Zawachiki, this is a little bit less at 26%. And if you can recall earlier, the distribution work was shared between the developer and the disco. So this allowed them to a little better than others optimize the cost for distribution. For Robinho, the cost comes at 54%, while we say it's just under 42%. However, on the average, all cost for distribution and interconnection stands at 53%. Now, for those who have not done an IMG before, you ask yourself, what are the components of this cost? So typically, you will buy transformers, either, both step up and step down. You need to, build new substation or rehabilitate existing substation. And then for the network expansion, typically lines, like Fola said, lines have been built by community members, by effort from, people who do not really take into cognizance the existing standards. So lines are sometimes underspecified or, using conductor sizes not approved by law. So you have to mostly change lines, change poles, equipment. And another core component of distribution is the metering. You most times have to meter the community or the cluster that you are powering. For most discos, metering rate is less than 50%. In the case of IMGs, for all of these clusters, you would have to, meter our customers. So metering and also customer connection takes a large chunk of the money. And lastly, the islanding and grid reconnection mechanism. Now, what makes this business model or what makes this project interconnected is the ability to connect and also to disconnect from the grid. And so the cost of that mechanism for establishing that connection safely and also disconnecting from the grid safely also it is one cost that takes a huge part of the budget. Next slide, please. So far, for the 4 projects that we have implemented and that we've supported, the cost of the unit cost of both the PV and the BSS is as shown on the left. If you aggregate this cost, on average, they are higher than the global average for 2024. However, the cost of some of these projects is because, or the reason behind some of this discrepancy or the variance is because some of these projects have begun development way back in 2020, and some of them have even gone into procurement and closed that on procurement in 2020, 2021. So, if you bring that cost of 2020 and compare to 2024, you would see that, that majorly is the reason for that, variance. For projects that we have supported in recent time, in 2024, you can see that the cost closely matches, those of the global average of 2024. Now, aggregating all this together for the unit cost of all 4 pilot projects, the cost of energy comes to 57 cents for the first wave of project. Comparing that to a typical isolated IMG, which cost about 46 cents per kilowatt hour, we know for sure there's room for improvement. And so on the next slide, we look at cost reduction opportunities for these IMGs. Now, one thing I noted in the earlier slide is that the cost of most of this, the generation cost, were from way back in 2020, 2021, 2022. Following global, PV and BSS prices, in 2025 upwards, we envisage a cost savings of about 21 cents per kilowatt hour on generation asset alone. Also, we identified partnership and collaboration between developers and discos as also another factor that could help lower distribution costs. Also, leveraging economies of scale. Most of these IMG, if you notice, are under 1 megawatt. For larger IMGs, of about 5-10 megawatts, from our analysis, we saw that the unit cost, comes at a better, rate per kilowatt hour. And lastly, when selecting distribution network, one has to be cognizant of the state of health of the distribution network. So when selecting, developers and discos need to, reach a middle ground. We don't want you selecting a distribution network that is, maybe too poor, but then reach a middle ground on what the state of the distribution network health is. Next slide, please. Now, there are opportunities to, grow this business model exponentially. And so some of them is, reducing cost on cost reduction and also enhancing project outcome. One key way of doing this is by having the distribution companies take leadership of the project development process itself. So we believe strongly that when the host distribution company takes the lead in the project development process, they can then more readily aggregate large number of projects and opportunities in their own franchise area and then put them out for a single wave of procurement. So we want discos, procuring 70 megawatts, 80 megawatts of projects rather than developers going around communities looking for 20 kilowatts, 50 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts, or 500 kilowatts. Also, for developers, we think they should focus on their own area of specialties. If you have any area that is your own area of expertise, you can do that internally. But for other area of specialization that you don't necessarily have in-house, like for when you are building a project, you can outsource the civil contract out. You can outsource the lines work out. Focus on your own area of specialty. Also, for the distribution network costs, you would observe that having 50% or over 50% of the total project capex going to distribution cost alone is not the position we want to have ourselves. So we are advocating that public funds should be allocated to the upgrade and rehabilitation of some of this network, and also for project de-risking. We're also imploring our partners in government to formulate and adapt policies that will allow IMG capabilities and also promote local clean tech manufacturing. Thanks to our friends in REA and NEC, we understand that they are working towards allowing for larger IMG sizes, and we are all looking forward to seeing some of this result of the policy that they are going to formulate. Lastly, we believe strongly that public and philanthropic fund should support training and manpower development as well as capacity building for institutions for a critical sustainable market growth. Thank you, Fola, and I'll pass it back to Alberto.
Thank you so much, Ridwan and Fola. It's great to see all the questions popping in the Q&A chat and the interest to learn more about these projects. All the analysis, learnings, and insights that we are presenting to you today, it's obviously just a synthesis of what the report contains. So please go into the link we are providing in the chat to learn more about our work and the work all these developers and discos have put for the past 3 years. Yeah, you can download the report from the link provided in the chat. We have witnessed some headwinds, not only from the first wave of projects presented here, but also from some recent DISCO announcements for DISCO-led project procurement, REAs and World Bank efforts to scale these solutions through DARES. REA was making a point on that during the welcome remarks. GIZ IMAS also recently commissioned a few undergrid minigrids, or NERC also efforts and appetites, including the order for DISCOs to procure 10% of their annual power via embedded generation or DERs. Moving on into the panel, I would like to now introduce the 4 panelists, and then I'll be asking questions to each of you directly. First, we are joined today by Fatima Haliru, Power Purchase Lead at Ikeja Electric, who has been instrumental in the development of the recently commissioned 500 kilowatt peak interconnected minigrid at Ikeja Electric service territory, serving over 4,000 or 5,000 rather customers at the moment. We're also joined by Henry Hure, CEO of Darwin Coast, the Nigerian developer that operates the same interconnected minigrid in Robinho in Ogun State. Next, we have Umar Mohammed, Assistant General Manager at NERC, working in interconnected minigrid permits and licensing and related work. Last but not least, we count with John Ufeosi, the lead project development and business at PowerGen Renewable Energy. John was part of the PowerGen team that back in late 2023 commissioned the first interconnected minigrid in Nigeria, the Toto interconnected minigrid in Nasarawa State. So my first question goes to you, Fatima. From the DISCO perspective, what were the initial assumptions or expectations about interconnected minigrids that were either confirmed or significantly challenged during the development and implementation of Robinho interconnected minigrid? Fatima, I think you are on mute. Thank you.
Thanks, Alberto, and hello, everyone. From the DISCO perspective, one of the initial assumptions we had about interconnected mini-grids was that they would be relatively straightforward to integrate once we got regulatory approvals and sorted out the technical feasibility, ensuring that those were established. We expected that once we had community buy-ins and executed the PPAs, the rest would follow smoothly. However, with Robinho, the project significantly challenged that assumption. We realized early on that the coordination between stakeholders, including the developer, the community, and even utility stakeholders, so that's the internal DISCO teams, commercial, legal, technical, regulatory, finance, required far more deliberate alignment, ensuring that every of those units moved at the same pace. From connection agreement to tariff structure, it was critical and it was not always easy, even post pilots. So educating the community on the tariff models, I personally think that is one of the key things that I've come to learn is important to the course of the project, and it shouldn't be at the end of the project, say when the project gets commissioned. The community needs to be involved in the knowledge or educating them about what the tariff would be, why the tariff would be what it would be, right? So there has to be that continuous engagement and seeking their buy-in and alignment. So it's not enough to seek their buy-in in if they want the supply, but are they able to pay? Do they want to pay? Do they understand why they need to pay the tariff that is going to be brought up? Another expectation that was confirmed, though, was the potential of IMGs to deliver sustainable, reliable power to underserved areas. Robinho, which is an underserved rural community in Ogun State, now has access to a 1 megawatt solar solution through this interconnected setup. This validates the model, but it also reminded us that success hinges on structured framework, flexibility, and sustained engagement from all parties, the DISCO, the developer, even the regulatory body. So generally everyone is expected, or everyone is able to help this to be sustainable and successful if we're all open to being flexible and adopting just as we go. I'll probably round up that question by saying that because they are pilots, it's not expected that it be perfect. Pilots are tests, right? And so we continually see now that there are a few things that need to be tweaked here and there post the project execution or post the project commissioning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I like your point around flexibility among stakeholders and, conveying this to the audience for today's webinar, that these were pilot projects, and therefore we have a bunch of learnings and things that could be done better, and that's why we are disseminating this today. Next, I would like to hear from the developer's perspective. One of the main insights highlighted in the IMG report is that these projects have taken a lot longer to be deployed from initiation to completion, an average of 4 years. Clearly, there is room for improvement for the next wave of projects. So perhaps, Henry, this question goes to you. What are the key learnings from Darwin Coast perspective regarding project timelines? Were there any significant delays in your projects? And if so, what were the primary causes? How can future projects streamline their timelines? Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Just to respond to Alberto's question, so from our standpoint, we did experience some delays, I would say, and I would say that for minigrid, interconnected minigrid, most developers should expect delays, being that it's a brownfield. and not a green field, there'll be a lot of moving parts. Typically from the experience with off-grid environments, there are less moving parts. You have sort of a green field, land is more or less surplus, and then you have a community that's eager, that's never seen power before. But in this case, you're dealing with existing infrastructure. And in some cases, some of these communities typically are currently getting power for, like, let's say 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, depending on what it is. So the developer really has to figure out a way to blend or mesh their construction schedule with the DISCO supply time. That would include outage coordination, because you don't want to keep the community members in darkness while you're constructing, right? So it would mean that you have to coordinate with the DISCO on when the power is on, so you can sort of shift work to a different area or pause work in that area. And this can, as we all know, can definitely extend the timeline of projects. Then the other point that's been mentioned a couple of times here are negotiations. So being that it's a legacy or existing site, there are a lot of negotiation amongst the different parties. And some of the key things that came up during our negotiation was legacy debt, how to manage or handle legacy debts. So those type of things, typically would slow down negotiations. Then trying to account for existing infrastructure and new infrastructure that's being purchased, and securing land and the like. So these types of negotiations, I would say, does prolong project timeline. And the other thing I would say will be, depending on the community, access road can be a hindrance. And, trying to figure out the best time. This kind of applies to all mini grids, but in some cases, being that these areas are more developed, one would really want to be careful in terms of rainy season. Because if the roads are bad, that could definitely prolong the construction timeline, because there are a lot of moving parts, especially when you're carrying heavy equipment across site. So these are some of the learnings that we went through during our construction phase. Namely, I mentioned the outage coordination, agreements, negotiations of agreements, then also access roads and the likes. The complexities of this can definitely prolong the timeline, and it requires sort of a very delicate and planning for developers to be able to go past or succeed in this type of project implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. I'm going to move to you now, John, to continue to hear from the developer's perspective. Particularly, the report highlights that PowerGen had to install an automatic voltage regulator, AVR, to be in sync with the local grid from ADC. So from your experience, how do interconnected mini-grid developers manage issues with poor grid power quality in interconnection? And how do IMG solutions improve grid networks for an effective interconnection?
Thank you very much, Alberto. I'm glad to be here. And hi, everyone. Good to meet you all. Right. So your question speaks to the fundamental distinguishing characteristic of an IMG, right? I mean, if there's no interconnection, the business premise fails outright. So in partnership with DISCOs, basically IMG developers can make the requisite investments to improve grid networks to ensure the much required electricity is delivered to end users, both in terms of quality and availability. So that handshake between the IMG developer and the DISCO, right, helps to determine who makes the investment to improve the grid quality. But the developer can do that to save time, right, while ensuring that the DISCO is fully aligned, right? So in my own experience, right, it is easier and faster for the developer to help out the utility to ensure that grid power quality is improved and managed, right? because then they are mostly accountable to the end user, being that they are there to augment the supply of the main grid, basically, right? Expectations have to be met, expectations have to be managed, not by the DISCO this time around, but the IMG developer. That in a nutshell answers your question, Alberto.
Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate your concise response. I'm going to move now to NERC, having heard, perspectives from developers and One Disco. Clearly, a lot more work needs to go into these solutions, including, better share of roles and responsibilities by the primary stakeholders. On that note, the report provides additional insights and recommendation. I would like to now turn it to Umar from NERC. Umar, thank you for joining us today. Having been part of multiple discussions in this matter with developers, discourse, and sector stakeholders, including RMI and GIAP, I'd like to ask you what policy and regulation frameworks are needed, in addition to the existing framework, to further facilitate and streamline the integration of interconnected mini-grids in the main grid.
Thank you, Roberto, and hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. It's exciting to be here and discuss mini-grids, specifically IMGs. As you are aware, the Commission is very responsive, and it's a response to the market. As the market evolves, the Commission responds. Just in 2023, we were able to review the regulation to improve the regulation and make it more better for the market. Looking at your question, I think there are some few areas that, despite the fact it's already there in the regulation, but one of the areas is looking at technical standards. How do we standardize it? Basically, I think John spoke about it, having issues with voltage, safety, synchronization. So one of the ways is to standards will help to reduce engineering risks. I think that is one key area, and the Commission is already working on it. Looking at dynamic tariff structures is also one way. What we have seen over time is that developers basically adopt the tariff that is on grid, but the opportunity is there for them to be innovative. One way they could use time of use tariff, for instance, and now that we're having a lot of interconnected grids, they can be able to support the grid, especially during peak periods. So if they're able to use time of use tariff, they can be able to do that. That is also provided in the tariff tool. Then aligning stakeholder expectation in the sense that planning, what the discourse have planned should be aligned, or the discourse planning should align with what the developers are also planning, so that sites can, before ahead of time, they could identify sites that that the disco is already planning to use them as IMGs. Capacity building is key. I think Fatima has also spoken about it. It's still a new field, and you will see that the support that RMI GIAP has been providing, and I also saw somebody ask the question that since 2018, the mini-grid regulation has been approved by the Commission, but it's only now that we're beginning to see interconnected mini-grids coming on because of the challenges that we've had over time. Most of the developers were concentrating on isolated mini-grids. We could see that there's a growth in the market, and people are now beginning to look at interconnected mini-grids with the support of DFIs. Then data sharing is also a very key aspect between the developers and the DISCO. They should be able to share data, load data, operations, grid status, basically just to improve monitoring, to improve response time, and also improve planning over the period of time. I think those are the key areas that I think going forward, if we look at it, we might be able to improve both the policy and the regulatory field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umar. That is so great to hear from the regulator. We have about 5 more minutes for the panel session, and I'm looking at the time. I'd like to ask one more question to each of the panelists, so I'm going to ask you to please keep your answer short for about 1 minute. My next question goes to you, John. Umar from NERC mentioned the importance of data sharing. So I would like to ask you, how has data collection and monitoring played a role in your case in understanding the performance and optimizing the operations of Toto in this case? And what are some of the key metrics that are being tracked?
Thank you, Alberto. Right. In minigrid development, right, especially when it comes to IMGs, finding the right balance between system sizing and energy demand is more of an art than science. Why? Because you actually need the data sets to be certain. You need to work with data to be certain, right? The more data points that are available, the better the services that can be rendered to end users. As then now load growth can better be planned for with data-backed evidence in terms of robust system designs, and then funding becomes a lot easier for financiers and investors to assess, the associated risks. Even revenue can be better, protected to the extent to which leakages can be blocked, right? Because then you can assess how much energy is lost due to theft, for example, in the HC&C mix, right? So the importance of data in managing the operations of an IMG cannot be overemphasized, right? That is the core. It helps us understand the day-to-day running and how to plan for the future. Some of the metrics that we currently track are the average revenue per user, which is very key. You get to understand not just how much a customer, for example, spends in terms of cash, but how much they consume and their behavior generally, their consumption behavior, right? You also tend to understand from a general perspective the time of use. You want to be able to understand, okay, time of use, when is there much demand on my system? Reliability indices, for example, the SIDI, the System Average Interruption Distribution Index, the CAIDI, Customer Average Interruption Distribution Index, connection count, and that's just to mention a few. I hope I kept that within time. Thank you.
Yeah, you did. Thank you, John. Moving quickly, Fatima, from the DISCO perspective, what were or are the key considerations and benefits of integrating IMGs into your network?
So of the benefits, we considered grid stability and reliability, ensuring that the interconnection would not disrupt existing supply while improving service to those underserved communities. Obviously, first on the benefits would be that service that is being provided to the underserved communities, the customer satisfaction or customer experience that we expect to improve in those locations. We also had to assess the technical feasibility, protection schemes, and the grid impact to confirm alignment with our operational standards. I think one of the other things that was really major was the commercial sustainability. We had to ensure that the project made business sense, obviously, for us, from cost recovery to tariff structure to load management to the partnership terms with the developer. This meant close collaboration across all our units, legal, commercial, finance, to define clear, bankable agreements. The benefits, however, have been significant. Interconnected minigrid allows us to extend quality supply to the areas where grid reliability is poor. They also improve customer satisfaction if properly done, and it's like I keep mentioning, just that general involvement with the community and continuous engagement with the community, reducing load on overstretched feeders, and support our own energy transition goals by incorporating cleaner distributed generation like solar. So overall, it's a win-win-win, like we said, for the DISCO, for the developers, and the communities that we serve.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fatima, for offering those insights. And in addition, as Fola mentioned, right, like one of the major benefits for DISCOs is these areas they are in a way leasing out to developers go from loss-making or not making so much revenues to making important augmented revenues. I'm going to move to you again, Umar, for the last question as part of the panel. From a regulator perspective, and you have already offered some thoughts, having been in the middle of these discussions, negotiations, sometimes you know, serving as a mediation entity, what are the areas that NERC sees that DISCOs and developers need to work on to fast track the adoption of future IMG projects?
Yeah, thank you once again, Alberto. I think there are possibly 4 or 3 areas that both the DISCO and the developers need to work on. One of the key areas is having bankable commercial agreements. Before now, before the review of the regulation in 2023, we see negotiations dragging for so long, maybe sometimes up to a year. And the commission has included in the regulation that the DISCO must respond within 15 days. If I write to the DISCO and say, yes, can I, for instance, develop this site? Can I do feasibility on this site? Then you must respond within that short time. For the developers, it's key for them to develop financially sound proposals. Over time, we have also seen the developers have been able to develop their skills, improve their skills in these areas. They are now able to do, of course, with the help of development partners like you, they're able to do better proposals that are bankable. And network data, the DISCO should be able to share proactively their feeder and load data on their system. And developers also over time should be able to share the performance of the feeder and the network, so that that sharing of information helps in better planning for both of them. It improves trust, and it also improves credibility of the system, both for the DISCO, the developer, but as well as customers. Joint planning. Before now, the developer plans and then just get to the DISCO, and this is what I want to do. I think that having joint planning will help to improve the system, will help to make it faster, and will also help to reduce time for all of them. Technical readiness is also standard. The developers need to do grid impact studies. The DISCOs need to provide those studies, those information to the developers, so that they're able to conduct these studies within a short period of time. Then building internal capacity is very key. As I've said initially, the developers have been able to develop these skills over a period of time, but the DISCOs, unfortunately, because they are just starting IMGs, they don't have those skills. The developers can train, or they can work with the DISCOs to be able to pass those skills to them. Developers can also provide space to embed DISCO staff in their offices, so that they can also learn the process of Minigrid. Then the most important aspect also is customer engagement. All of us here have spoken about, at least all the 3 panelists have spoken about customer engagement. We need to manage customer expectations. We need to manage on tariffs, for instance, because customers basically compare what is on grid and what are you providing me as an IMG. Despite the fact that you are providing me 14 hours, the fact that some customers are already on band A are getting the same 18 hours, but as an IMG, typically you might get you pay higher tariffs. So these are some things that needs to be, service reliability is key, where you have promised that you provide, for instance, 18 hours, 24 hours, then you must ensure that you provide that 24 hours. But in the event that you're unable to provide it, you're able to also provide information on time to customers, so that they know you need to do some repairs, you need to do whatever you need to do. And then the interaction between the grid and the IMG is also a key area that we need to work on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Umar, and thank you for flagging those issues, including the continuous workforce development on the DISCO side, which is critical to scale the sector, and something that RMI and GIAB are, paying a lot of attention and supporting. We are getting a lot of questions from the audience, and that is great. Thank you so much, and bear with us as we respond to them in the chat. But I would like to curate a few of the questions and pass them on to the panelists. The first question I think is by Johannes. Good to see that question from you, Johannes. The question is, the average distribution cost of $500 per connection looks on the high side, especially considering that some of the distribution network components should already be in place prior to the minigrid developer come to site. Could you highlight some of the aspects that have driven up this cost? Henry, I'd like you to take a first pass at that question.
Yeah, so I guess for the most part, it depends on the existing assets. If the assets are in good condition, then we would expect that cost to be much more lower. And what would need to be covered would be the transformers at the gen yard, and also metering. That's if metering is part of distribution, metering solutions as well. However, as we know, typically you won't get the what I would consider cream of the crop sites from the discos. So a lot of sites that you end up with are sites that you will have to do quite a bit of distribution work. And believe it or not, sometimes working on brown fields tends to be more expensive than green fields, because some poles you might need to uproot the poles, and the cost for uprooting poles and planting new poles, then restringing and all that, that could typically increase the cost. So at times there might be misconception that the distribution cost will be cheaper, which is possible, but if you are left with sites that needs quite a bit of upgrade, it might even end up being higher, depending on what you see on the ground. So that's one. Then also, keep in mind, you're dealing with higher voltages as well. You're dealing with sometimes 11 kV, 33 kV, and you have to run, not only that, you also have to run the low voltage as well. So that starts to add quite a bit, when you're dealing with multiple voltage levels. And but overall, I think it can be optimized. There can be efficiency there, but just site specific, it could be more.
Thank you, Henry. It's such a good question, and we have repeatedly said during this webinar that there are a bunch of learnings, and at RMI and GIAB we have done some modeling, and we believe the current picture we are presenting to you of like an average 50% of the cost comes from distribution network upgrades and extension. We haven't said that in a very detailed manner, but in most of these sites, the developers have extended the network to reach new connections. So we believe that 50% capex on distribution and interconnection can be dramatically brought down, which will be key to deliver better rates at faster paces for future developments. I'd like to take another question from the audience. The question is, what is the typical interface between staff of the developer and the disco? It's such a good question and practical question. So maybe Fatima, you can take a first pass on that question. Fatima, if you can hear me.
I'm sorry, Alberto, I lost you for a few seconds. Could you take that again, please?
Absolutely. The question is, what is the typical interface between staff of the developer, for example, Darwin Coast, and the disco?
The typical interface. Also, from inception, we develop a project group, and then we have weekly project meetings to ensure that there's alignment. Did I miss the question?
Yeah, I think it's a broad question, but yeah, the question is about the interaction on daily basis between the Darwin Coast or the developer team and the KJ Electric. That's how I understand the question.
I see Henry trying to crack a smile. Yes, like I said, there is usually a project update meeting every week, but beyond that, we have constant engagements, formal and informal, just to touch upon whatever updates that we have going on the project to ensure that there's alignment at all times.
Thanks, Fatima. We have another question, which I think is very interesting from an anonymous attendee. I think we're very curious to know who that person is, but perhaps this is a good question for you, Umar from NERC. The question is there a dedicated multi-year tariff order, MITO, applicable to IMGs, or are we using the rules and methodologies applicable to either the national grid or isolated mini-grids?
I think the short answer is yes. From the inception of from the signing of the mini-grid regulation, one of the key things that the Commission worked on, recognizing that the fact that the mini-grid is supposed to be a light-handed regulation, is to develop a lot of tools that will help developers. And Alberto, you know that in 2018, when we started, there were basically 0 developers, and the discos, nobody basically knows anything about mini-grids. And we had to build that system over time. We had to encourage developers. We had to do a lot of stakeholder engagement, severally with GIZ, with RMI, with JAP, so many of them, just to encourage, to enlighten customers. And one of the things that we have developed is to develop a portal where developers could apply for their mini-grid permits without having to come into the Commission. And that portal also provided a tariff tool that was developed, where the developer also uses that tariff tool to, first, he can use it to just do his feasibility studies, test the system, see how it goes, but he also uses it to submit for approval. That tariff tool was recently updated just in December 2024, and we now have a much more improved tariff tool that anybody can download it on our website. Anybody that is interested, you don't have to be a developer, you don't have to be a disco. Anybody that is just interested, as a student, as a researcher, as anybody that just wants to know how the mini-grids works, you can download the mini-grid regulation. You can also download the tariff tool and just test it and see how it works. In the event that you notice any, or you think that there are some improvements that are needed, you could always just send an email to the Commission, and we'll look at it and do stakeholder engagement and do the review. So it's something that we do on a regular basis. I also want to mention that we also have a distribution use of system tool also, where developers can use it, and discos can also use it to calculate the DUS that are supposed to pay. So all the systems are put in place just to make it easy for developers, to make it light-handed as we had wanted it to be. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Umar. The interconnected mini-grid space, and more broadly the DER space, I think is a very dynamic, evolving space. In general, the electricity sector in Nigeria. And we have a very interesting question from our audience, and I think John from PowerGen and perhaps even Fausia from GIAP can take a response and offer their views. The question is, how is the issue of competition managed as the discos become more efficient? Will this trend not threaten the long-term viability of IMGs after significant CapEx investment into these projects? So yeah, I'd love to know if you, John, or Fausia have any perspectives to offer here.
I mean, I could let Fausia go first, right? It's just the gentle thing to do. But if you want me to go first, that's fine.
Please go ahead, John. I actually missed the question, so please proceed.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Fausia. So as per competition, first, we've barely scratched the surface, right? I tell people that we're very early on in the development cycle for DR solutions in Nigeria, right? And we haven't even started yet. So what's the essence of competing in the wide ocean, right? There's still a lot to do, right? So in this instance, right, we're basically collaborating with the discos. I mean, the discos do not have enough to share around the teeming population they serve, right? So if a developer comes into a certain area, it then means that the disco can then focus elsewhere, because they're sure that the developer, is first meeting the reliability standard, right, to ensure the end users are satisfied in one way or another in terms of quality and availability, just like I said earlier, right? So there's really no competition, right? The overall goal is to build a a larger grid from the inside out, rather from the outside in, right? Reaching areas and communities that are underserved or even unserved and try to bring them into the center. Not the traditional design where we've got the TCN at the center and trying to build out, from the center out. But right now, the essence of the DR is to build from the outside in. Currently, I wouldn't say there's competition, right? As much support and improved services as we can get, the betterment for the overall sector, I would say. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Fausia, I see you are on camera. Would you like to offer your views?
I think John has said it perfectly. I'm not sure I can do justice to that question as he did. I think ultimately we know the reality of the country right now. Averagely, we have 4 gigawatts on the grid daily, so there's a huge gap, and what we just need to think about is how we work together. For GIAP, we are very keen on partnerships, leveraging partnerships. So we try to promote, public-private and even philanthropic partnership to close these gaps. I think ultimately, the less we think about competition and more around collaboration, the faster we can move. And I think these projects have shown just that. When we started off thinking about this project, one of the objectives was for us to actually figure out or find out if there really is a market here, if there's an opportunity for us to solve these problems as quick as possible, and who can be part of that journey. And it's fantastic to see how the market has evolved many years ago, and I think has been said as well by Umar at NERC. You couldn't have these conversations, and even discos weren't having any conversations with private sector. But now we've seen the market evolve, and these conversations are happening. As Abba mentioned earlier, the DARES MST program has already shown, over, I think, 8 discos being part of that conversation. So I think it's an evolving discussion, and I'll end by saying we have an open mind and really, really think of how we can work together with partnerships, very creative partnerships to drive our joint goals around energy access and improving the state of the country and also across Africa from a development perspective. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fausia. And thank you all panelists for your insightful contributions and for joining us today and lending us your perspectives and insights into this very exciting growing market. I think it's very clear that the sector has experienced tremendous progress. You mentioned that, Fausia, over the past few years, although there are some areas that are hindering progress. And from your interventions, I think I noted a few of them. Most importantly, collaboration and stronger cooperation among stakeholders, right? These are win-win-win solutions, so everybody wins. So we shouldn't look at the issue from the competition aspect, but rather from collaborating for a mutual win. Streamlining and standardizing documentation, technical standards. I just posted on the chat a toolkit that we put together about a year ago that we hope can be useful for the sector. We also think innovation in better cost structures will be very, very useful and helpful to deliver these type of projects at the scale at more affordable rates. Regulation needs to evolve as needs arise, et cetera, et cetera. We are running out of time, and I'm going to invite you, Suleiman Babamanu, our Nigeria country director, to provide some final remarks. Over to you, Suleiman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alberto. And this has been very, very exciting, to be honest. I sat down here and I was going through the chat, and I also been receiving some private messages from participants and how this has been very, very, insightful for a lot of people, and it's really as you've mentioned, Alberto, and some of the panelists have also alluded to, and Fauzia also, you mentioned that it's important to acknowledge, you know, the amount of work that has actually gone to get this sector to where it is today. You know, anyone that has been in this sector for a few years would appreciate, you know, the challenges, you know, of having even a conversation with the DISCO to talk about, you know, any kind of, you know, partnership with a private developer. So it was seen as a competition rather than a collaboration. So here we are today talking about projects. I've noticed in the chat that, you know, it felt like, you know, since the Minigrid regulation, there's only a handful of projects that have happened. And yes, there are not many projects, but I don't take it for granted the amount of work that has actually been done. So I want to thank everyone for participating here today. A lot of work needs to be done. And, you know, we need to all work together to ensure that we see the scale that we all sort of envisage. It's a country of, as mentioned, 200 million plus population with a huge number of people without access to electricity. So I want to just share some areas where I think, and some of them have been highlighted by the panelists. Can you share slides, please, Ola? Some of these points have been highlighted by the panelists and in the discussion that we've had today. And for us to be able to adopt interconnected mini-grids beyond Nigeria and even scale them in Nigeria, we need some of these factors to be able to do that. As NERC has mentioned, you know, all of the policy alignment that is required, whether it's related to standards or bankability of projects and improving the capacity of interconnected mini-grids, all of these need to come together to be able to achieve the win-win-win solution that Fola presented in the slides, as we have seen. From the presentation, you've also seen how the impact of interconnected mini-grid when it comes to the amount of power the DISCOs were able to provide when you compare it with what the initial scenario was. We're looking at about 18 hours. And that tells you a lot in terms of what distribution network improvement can do when it's done. And, you know, the system currently is providing inadequate supply, and it needs to be improved to be able to serve the customers as well as improve the revenue for the utilities. As we've also seen, you know, the demand of electricity will continue to grow. Nigeria, between now and 2050, will be the 4th largest population in the whole world. So if you can think about the amount of people without energy access, you can also think about what that means in the next 50 years if we don't address these issues right now. And so we need to sort of support these large projects to be able to also attract commercial capital that would enable the investment. There's huge willingness and ability to pay. We've seen the comparative slides that Ridwan has presented in terms of the average consumption per user, comparing interconnected mini-grids and isolated mini-grids. And you can see how, you know, it makes business sense to invest in, you know, interconnected mini-grids. So, but this needs to also be, you know, be amplified in a way that sort of encourages both the utility or the DISCOs and the private developers to work together. Please scan this barcode to download the full report, or you can go to the RMI website if you want to download it from the website. I encourage you to reach out if you want to talk more about the work that we have presented today. I do want to acknowledge all of the work that has gone in getting us to where we are today. Firstly, the utilities for their collaboration and the developers for all of the hard work that they've done. I know this has not gone without challenges, as we have seen in terms of the amount of time it took for some of these projects to get completed and the amount of time it took for some of the agreements to be to be signed. I do want to acknowledge also the role that the REA is playing, being the lead and making sure that there's leadership and coordination within the sector, as well as of course overall the Ministry of Power on providing the overall alignment and coordination. As Hayati did mention, RMI is working with REA to implement the DARE project. Lastly, of course, GIAP, this would not have been possible without the support of GIAP. We want to continue doing this amazing work together, and the support and the collaboration has been really, really great. And hopefully we can continue to do more. For the participants, thank you very much for your time, for participating, for your insightful questions and discussions. Please reach out to any of us if you want to engage more. I really look forward to getting your feedback from the report, and looking forward to doing more projects, interconnected and embedded generation projects. So thank you very much, and over back to you, Albert.
Thank you so much, Suleiman. And thank you everyone who joined us today. On behalf of RMI and GIAP, thank you. You will be receiving an email from RMI with a recording of the webinar, as well as a quick survey and associated documentation. Until next time, stay connected and let's keep the momentum going. Thank you all.
Thank you.